weeks, we have been setting up a pattern in a discussion about, I guess, what you'd call goal setting. The name of the essay is Puzzling, and the first week we put a puzzle together. And we kind of got off to false starts and corrected ourselves and explained how that relates to life and living, making a living. And then the second week, we actually pointed out the fact that we completed the puzzle without ever mentioning the word goal. And frankly, we had a jaundiced discussion about goals, goal setting, the use of the word, what it does in our subconscious mind, and why so many people have difficulties with that. As evidenced by the fact that only 3% of our population in the richest land in the world actually reach financial independence. Only 3%. Also, when people lose their jobs, lose the structure of their lives, many go into a state of total chaos and panic, because they are not prepared to be free. That's been evident now for numbers and numbers of years. And what we've been doing is reaching into the marketplace and pulling people out and re-preparing them to be independent entities. Now, I haven't punched a clock or worked for anybody since 1957, and I would want that for anybody. Oh, there's plenty of room for those of you who want to venture into that direction, that you can do that without abandoning our corporations that need employees, people who are perfectly content to let the work flow to them and receive a paycheck in order to help someone else reach their goals. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all, so long as you know that's what you're doing. But oftentimes people get caught up in these things, and really it's almost like they stop thinking. So someone else what? Thinks for them. And so again, this is a challenge, a bit of information that you might apply not only to your job, but to your family and to your personal life and what have you. When we're talking about these kind of things, we have to make reference to Napoleon Hill. Napoleon Hill, some years ago, wrote a book, Think and Grow Rich, a classic, sold millions of copies, contributed to the success and happiness of an awful lot of people. I don't buy into every word that he wrote now, after all these years, because everything that's written essentially was coined and penned by an ignorant intellect. You know, there were things that were progressing, new awareness comes that they didn't have to work with. However, it was a profound piece of work, and one of the things in there that they talked about was how, as a successful entrepreneur and businessman, having made huge sums of money in business and through the books that he wrote, commissioned a dozen young scholars to investigate the top 200 personalities in human history, to find out what it is about them, what did they do and not do that would cause someone to be successful. The idea being that if we essentially could find those denominators and do the same thing, then we could be equally successful. And I think a lot of motivators go on that premise. I don't know that it's a sound one, but that's what he was up to. There were numbers of denominators, but there was one that seemed to permeate every one of these personalities. Whether this thing was chiseled in granite, scratched on papyrus, written in a book, broadcast over the airways, it didn't seem to matter. They all had a purpose for their existence. They all had a purpose. We're going to kind of start at this point right here with this idea. Purpose. I think we have to ask, do you have one? Have you clearly defined a purpose for your life? And why would you want to bother? I mean, this is a worthwhile discussion for any individual or group of people. They all had a purpose. A purpose is pretty important. Goethe, the great German philosopher, was so excited about the results that people seemed to enjoy when they had a purpose, they actually wrote. Now, this was a ponderous thinker. This is a man with a great mind of our time, and he wrote that when someone had established a purpose, that people and providence and the laws of the universe actually changed to accommodate their achievement. That's pretty powerful. It's not right. I don't think that's what happens at all. But when a person has a purpose, there is a clarity in their thinking, a focus in everything they do that otherwise would not be there. There is a serendipity that almost always comes out of purpose. Serendipity, that's not a common term, but we hear it frequently, and it's easy to misunderstand. There is a fortunate, happy consequence for any purpose, certainly, but serendipity is something extra. The best way I can explain serendipity and how it might apply to what we're talking this evening, imagine a young boy, say he's 12 years old, lives with his family in a fairly poor part of town near a railroad track, and yet they have a television, and he's noticed a lot of talk about the environment and conservation and what have you. So he says to his daddy one day, he had noticed that the tracks and all the property around it was, kind of junky and trashy and what have you. And he said to his daddy one day, "Daddy, I'd like to clean up this environment. And would it be okay if I went along the track and picked up all the trash and cans and what have you, and sort of cleaned it up?" And his dad said, "Good idea. I'm proud of you, son. And I'll tell you what, when you collect all that, well, we can take it down to the recycling bin and pick up some extra money that you might be able to put on your bicycle." See, that's the happy consequence of the purpose. However, as he's picking up things, he's focused, as he's really intent on what he's doing. And he's including cigarette butts and those pop tops, on cans and what have you. And so he's really focusing, and guess what he finds? A diamond ring. It may have been there for years, perhaps lost by someone passing on a train or someone walking along the way, but he finds the diamond. He'd walked over it before, other people have passed over it, but no one saw it because they weren't focused, they weren't on purpose. You feel the difference? In other words, and I've seen this consequence time and time again in a career of people who were highly challenged, sometimes over-challenged. Once they got a purpose, things begin to shift. We can say this too. I have one of these for everybody here in the audience. As a matter of fact, if you want to call in, I'll send you one of these, along with a ticket or two to a live event. But the couple things that we have here on having a purpose. A fellow named William Cowper, another philosopher, said the only true happiness comes from squandering ourselves for a purpose. Squandering ourselves for a purpose. I'm almost happy that I can report that I think that's what I've done with my life. I've squandered it. A lot of times it hasn't been fruitful. Wouldn't say sometimes very successful. And other times, gosh, couldn't have asked for more. You know what I mean? Now, it's just been up and down and rich and poor and what have you, but I've always been on purpose, and I've squandered myself that way, and I really think that I can probably say I'm one of the happiest people I know. That it's been years since I've had an outrage, and a lot of it comes from being on purpose, having a keen sense of where you're going and why you're going there. As a matter of fact, I wrote this one, that nothing contributes so much to peace of mind as a steadfast purpose. A point on which the mind may focus its emotional, spiritual, intellectual, and vocational eye. Wouldn't hurt to read that once in a while. It might stimulate you to work on this because, frankly, it's going to take some work. Well, first of all, we have to figure what is a purpose. In the past, we have talked about, well, now I'm going to go first of all this way. We've defined a purpose as, kind of being like an equilateral triangle. And a purpose for one's life would be based on love. Now, I don't mean the frilly kind of stuff necessarily that might exist in a sexual way between a man and a woman, but love, patience and kindness, and guilelessness and selflessness and all the facets that make up love as we understand it in an agape sense. Love. It doesn't have to just be for people. It can be for the environment. Okay? It can be for an industry. It can be for a task. It doesn't matter. But a purpose would have to be based on love. And then, this side of the triangle is about preparation. The willingness to prepare. Because the will to win doesn't mean a thing. We hear about it a lot. The will to win doesn't mean a whole lot. Boy, that was really clear to me some years ago. I was in the Navy, and to find out whether I was a coward or had some chutzpah or not, I went into boxing, and it was overwhelming for me. I come to enjoy it because I was scared. And I was so scared that I prepared. In other words, I think I did more road work than anybody on the team. I sparred more rounds with all the weight classes. I spent more time on the heavy bag. I actually had a weightlifter. This guy was buffed up, and every day I would lay on the gym floor, and he would, with all his strength, pound a kind of a medicine ball, not one of those big fluffy ones, but kind of one of those hard ones. He would pound it into my chest and abdomen 200 times a day to prepare my body for whatever punches might be coming. In other words, and I did it because, like I say, I was a little heavyweight. I was a little guy, 5'9.5", and weighed in probably at about 195, 200. And I was having to fight guys that were like 6'4", 6'7", weighed anywhere from 230 to 270 pounds. And they got into boxing because they were big and tough. You know, friends would say, "Well, you ought to get on the boxing team. You're tough." Well, but they were big. I remember especially one trip we took to Quantico Marine Base. Now, remember what military I was in? I was in the Navy. And we were going to a Marine base. I mean, anybody knows that one Marine can beat up any 10 sailors. So my apprehension levels were way up, you know. And yeah, we were in the locker room just before the fight. And I mean, this big, buffed up guy, man, he was really getting ready to beat me up. And I got a little apprehensive. And I cut a deal with the referee to allow me to meet him in the middle of the ring before the fight started. Because I wanted to cuddle up to him, kind of, like sidle up and make everybody realize how big he really was, so he wouldn't look too good when he beat me up. It was the only, you know. Anyway, the referee didn't want to do that, but I said, "I'm not fighting if you don't," and I was already on the short end. I mean, with the referee, and but he let me do it, and we met, and there was some ooh and ahhing going on out there, and I figured that was my satisfaction for the evening. And we went back to our corner, the bell rang, and I came out, and I danced around, and you know, trying to stay away from him, and I figured this isn't going to work, so I began to move in, and I remember I jabbed high, kind of up to his chin, and I saw his chin come up a little bit. He raised his chin. That's a natural act. I mean, you just do that. Unless you're what? Trained and conditioned not to. Okay? Now, and a little light went on inside, so I danced around some more, and I kind of came down, and I jabbed low, and he dropped his hands. You're not supposed to do that. Not supposed to do that. And that little light brightened a little bit, and I figured, maybe there's a chance here. And so I created a combination in my mind. You know, a jab, a cross, a hook, an uppercut, a shovel hook, which I had was devastating, come away with a hook, and then jab away. You know, I was going to throw those punches no matter what he did. That's called a combination. Most fighters don't use them. They talk about them and they don't do them. You know, they kind of do what comes naturally. Well, I threw my combination, and he was on the floor writhing. Because he wasn't ready for that. He hadn't prepared. Because the will to win didn't mean a thing. And I became very conscious of that from that point on. And I see a lot of people say, "Yeah, I can do it." Some people say, "You just got to think positive." You know what I mean? That's not going to get it done. You've got to have the willingness to prepare, to study, to practice, to apply in order to get ready. Ready to do what? If you're going to be on purpose, you're getting ready to make a contribution. Ready to make a contribution, to elevate people, to enhance, to enlighten, to support them. We've been raised up in a society that stresses competition. And I'll tell you, it really doesn't work as well as we've been led to believe in a socioeconomic environment. For example, in 1979, I went into a company. Of all things, I was responsible to a sales force who sold pre-arrangement, funerals, if you would, door to door. You think that's challenging, okay? Within, I think it was about 5 or 6 months, our office was doing 300% more than the number 2 office in the company. 3 times as much. Did we have to do that in order to be the champions? Don't think so. What do you have to do to be the champion? Just a little bit more. Just $1 more per month and you're the star. Isn't that true? You're number 1. And you might satisfy yourself with that. But see, we were on a different mission. We were on a different mission. We were trying to make a contribution to the company and to the industry and to the community. It was about contribution. And so we were able to go beyond what we normally might do. Terribly important process. In other words, our purpose is based on love, the willingness to prepare, and contribution. Now, if you don't have a purpose for your life, you don't live in a vacuum, so you will have a posture about life. Because if you don't have a purpose for your life, you will have a posture about life. And the posture, we'd have to graph it out this way. It's going to be just a dichotomy, just the opposite. And rather than love, you're going to find it is probably based on fear. Oh, not abject fear, not the overwhelming kind of fear necessarily that causes you to scream or faint, but anxiety, stress, tentativeness, hesitancy, inappropriate behavior in a lot of different ways, based on fear, and neglect. Now, instead of preparation, there'd be a lot of neglect. I find that so many people, and myself included at various stages in my life, missed out on so much because we allowed big chunks of time to slip through our life unused and felt guilty about it and suffered for it. Neglect. It's kind of like, and any neglect on any particular day doesn't mean much. Doesn't mean much. For example, if you have a Coke today, no one's going to notice or care. But if you have a Coke tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, pretty soon you're having maybe a beer or, a Coke and a Twinkie. You know what I mean? In other words, it seems to accumulate this neglect, and over a period of time, you're in big trouble. As opposed to if you're on purpose in your preparation, you have an apple a day. Or do a push-up a day or something. That's an adjustment. Then that can make a big difference over an extended period of time because of the law of accumulation. Okay, neglect. Now, when you neglect, you slip off here, and then you spend a lot of time, and I can bet some of you can relate to this, in survival. Really striving to survive, to get by, to make ends meet, to catch up. Survival. Okay? Now, this purpose and posture rests, if you would, right on what I refer to as a time lifeline. It's a time lifeline that extends between this moment now, right now, and a questionable place in the future when you cease to exist. In other words, when you die. And we proceed along that time lifeline, either on purpose or with a posture. Now, typically, success is measured by elevation, isn't it? There's a sense of rising if you're successful. Which would be easiest to elevate? When your leading edge was the apex of this triangle, or the flat edge of this one? There's no question. And what's really fascinating is which takes the most time and trouble. Time and energy, time and effort. About the same. About the same. And so it's rather, an obvious choice. However, it takes some effort. I wrote on my purpose for years. I wrote the first one. And for a purpose to be effective, you have to confine it, to these elements. Most people's first purpose is like a mission statement. It's quite lengthy. But a purpose is an abstract thing that you will never accomplish. Now, you'll never fulfill, you'll never reach, you'll never achieve your purpose. It's something that you're on, it's something that you do, it's someone that you are, okay? It's abstract. For example, I can give you one. This is a product of several years of writing and rewriting, and I didn't stop. I still work at it, tweak at it, play with it, trying to see if I can strengthen it in some way. But frankly, it hasn't changed now for probably 30 to 35 years. Word for word, this is my purpose. And someone was kind enough to make a nice little pretty page for me, and I'll just read it to you. My purpose: to wonder, to examine, experience and enjoy my existence in order to better understand how I might enrich and enliven those around me, thereby warranting my being and having been. One sentence. One sentence. You can be on purpose sleeping on a park bench, totally broke. Or you can be on purpose living in a mansion with your own private jet. I've been both places. And it's the same purpose. Let's examine it for a minute. To wonder. I can't tell you how long ago I heard this phrase that to wonder will turn the heads of more angels than a plea. You know, if you just wonder about something, rather than just taking things for granted, just because someone said so or wrote something, you wonder about it. You ponder over it, okay? You wonder, and then you examine. Just because something is working, it doesn't mean it's working right. You know, we tend in our country to say, hey, if it's working, don't mess with it. Don't try to fix it. You know what I mean? No. Look at it, examine it. To wonder, to examine. Now, you got to experience. Life is experience, therefore experience is life. And so you got to reach out and you got to do things and meet people and test yourselves, experience and enjoy. That's not just fun stuff. To enjoy a life means all of it. The challenge, the reward, the overwhelm, you know what I mean? It's enjoy my existence. I don't know, you know, maybe this is it. 1929 right now to 1999 and continuing, but we don't know for how long. The existence may be the only one we'll have. But in order to enjoy the existence, in order to better understand how I might, doesn't mean I will, but how I might enrich and enliven those around me. Okay? Does it make sense that if I can enrich and enliven those around me, that my life will be better? I would think so. Yeah, it stands to reason. And it is. I'm surrounded by people who have adopted and adapted to, made adjustments about a lot of the things that we teach over it's a 9-week course. And I'll tell you, my life is better than most because I don't have people getting upset and frustrated and impatient and unkind and what have you. I mean, they've adopted these principles and life is easy. And they don't refute anybody else's beliefs or principles. They complement them, just add to them. You don't have to give anything up in order to do this. You know, in other words, it's a complement spelled with an E. To better understand how I might enrich and enliven those around me, thereby warranting my being. That satisfies my libido. Libido is not so much about sex as it is about being, existing, continuing. Okay? And so this is to warrant my being and having been, which honors my heritage, and having been. Takes a while to get to that, to write it and to examine it and rewrite it. Is it worth the effort? I think so. Because as it draws you away from any postures you might have based on previous experience and disappointments and setbacks, this can open a whole new vista for you. Writing a statement of purpose consisting of these things. Now, once again, why bother? Just how far do you want to take this? Once you have established a purpose for your life, and by the way, I might add that if you have difficulty determining it, defining it, writing it down, Socrates suggested that you adopt someone else's. Just adopt someone else's, cuddle up close, follow carefully, listen, adopt, okay? And out of that you will find your purpose. Out of that you will find yours. Does that make sense? No, just by adopting one. Okay, when you have defined it carefully, you'll notice some interesting things begin to happen. You have automatically defined parameters for your life. Parameters. Arenas within which you must engage. The choices that you make. In other words, the parameters, we're going to put it over here. We might say the principles for your life. And they will be yours. And they will be in concert with all the fine principles of any religion or any theology or philosophy that exists on the planet. It'll be that way because of what it's based on. Purpose, parameters, and principles. You'll know, too, that you have to honor them. For example, there'll be a sense that if you play out here, in other words, if you violate the principle, that these parameters will come out and encompass that behavior. And then you violate it again, and those parameters will move out, encompassing the behavior. In other words, it's kind of like, this is my purpose right here, and these are my parameters. And if I keep violating them, they kind of keep moving out and out and out. And boy, it gets stressful here, and pretty soon it collapses, and we wonder why. Okay? It's because you probably haven't clearly defined that or honoring it. After principles, then you establish plans. long range, 1 year, 2 year, 5 year. Some Oriental minds will go 200 years in advance, clearly defined plans and pro formas as to the way this thing is going to work. No plan ever works the way you set it out. It's a plan upon which you make adjustments. No, it's just a matter of, you do and review and change, do and review and change. It's a constant thing. And those plans, and by the way, those plans, you would have 4 of them. One for the spiritual, emotional facets of your life, which reflects on earlier show. One for the social secular, plan for your physical tangible, and a plan for your vocational professional life. And you'll notice what happens is that they synergize. Okay, they come together so that there's not a lot of disharmony in your life. It just works better. After plans, then of course projects. There's either short-term, 1 week, 1 day, or 1 month projects that once again will be in concert with your purpose. Life gets easier and easier and easier this way. Now, after projects, then there is the necessity of being willing to realize that all you have to do is practice. You have to practice. Practicing carries a big weight because, and we'll examine it carefully next week, but within practicing you have a permission, there's a premise, and there's a promise. The permission is it's okay to be clumsy, inept, and inadequate. Premise means you got to stretch, but the promise is you're going to get better.